We are going to talk in this video about the City of Salem's Statement of Net Position for the government. So this is government-wide, all right? It's on page 29 if you want to follow along. And the government-wide Statement of Net Position ties together the two fund statements of net position, right? So you'll have your governmental activities, which are in the governmental funds statement, and your business type activities, which are in the proprietary fund statement. And you'll notice that there is not a separate column for those fiduciary funds. That's because fiduciary funds don't belong to the government. They're things like pensions and trusts, and they're not really part of the government. They belong to the entity they're holding those in trust for. So they don't get consolidated into these government-wide statements. Now, you'll look here at this column that says primary government. Well, that's a total. So your governmental activities plus your business activities equal a primary government. This would be a component unit if there is one, or several combined to be component units. Maybe something that's not governmental, that's not a business activity that belongs under proprietary, but it's a component unit that totally answers under governmental, but sort of is separate. We talked about that before. So maybe a library or something that the government controls, but it's also a separate unit with its own financial statement. So the City of Salem has some kind of component unit, like a library or something. So somewhat similar to a balance sheet, the statement of net position has assets, has liabilities, but instead of owner's equity, you'll see we have this net position area here. And instead of just a final owner's equity or stockholder's equity number, what it has is three separate net positions, right? The net position in capital assets, any restricted assets, and any unrestricted assets that aren't either capital assets or restricted, right? So most stuff's capital asset, a building, a fire truck, but there could be some non-capital asset that is not restricted, and that goes here. So where do these numbers come from? Well, your net position is pretty obviously like on a balance sheet. You take your assets minus your liabilities and you come up with your net position. So for net investment in capital assets, you're going to take your capital assets net of depreciation. So there's that. And you subtract out any liabilities associated with the capital assets, which would be your long terms, right? Your bonds and your bonds. So if you took this number minus this and this, that would be your net capital investment, your net investment in capital assets. Restricted is going to come, remember all these numbers are coming from either your governmental funds balance sheet, well, really the reconciliation, or your fiduciary funds statement of net position, and then they come over here in these columns. So that's how we know which funds, which liabilities go with which. It's also where we get our restricted funds and our unrestricted funds. So if you'd come over and look over here, you'll see that on your City of Salem balance sheet for governmental funds, you've got your separated out your fund balances that show restricted and not. So that's how we know what's restricted and what's not. So we know the net investment in capital assets. We know what's restricted. And so then the difference between our total net position, which again we're getting from over here, well actually we get from this reconciliation, right? Which we'll look at in a little bit. But this number is our total net position, right? Which is here. So if I can figure out this, and I can figure out this, then the difference between this and these two is just this. So that's just a plug, all right? And the same thing applies for the business type activities. all these numbers come from the proprietary fund statement of net position, right? Which does not actually need a reconciliation like the governmental funds balance sheet, because these are actually kept on the accrual basis just like these. So that's how that works. There's this, then of course this and this totals this, and these are kind of kept separate. So that's a statement of net position government-wide. So the government-wide statement of net position is just totaling the governmental funds and the proprietary funds. Remember, fiduciary funds don't go on here. All right, so that's that. We're going to also talk about a few others, so if you want to look at some of the other videos on some of the other statements, I'm hoping that'll help clear that up.